to the Film and Television Trade Forum's second time around panel. This panel is sponsored by Alliance Atlantis, and we thank them very much for their continuing support of the Trade Forum. We are very privileged to have on this panel three directors whose work represents some of the most interesting in current cinema, and certainly the most different. While their films may be different, their passion for filmmaking is very much the same, and we're looking forward to talking with them. On my immediate right, or my farthest right, is Jeremy Podeswa, director of The Five Senses, which also is going to be our mid-festival gala film. Next to me is Mr. Alexander Payne, director of Election and Citizen Ruth, and on my left is Doug Liman, the director of Go. What we're going to do today is break this up into approximately 3 sections where I'll get the panelists to discuss the development of their first work, and then moving from panelist to panelist, then go on to development of the second larger film, if it was larger in fact, and then finally the aftermath and what they're up to next. And then, if there's time permitting, we will field questions from the audience as I take off my giant watch so I can watch things here. Jeremy, unfortunately, will have to leave us about 10 minutes before the due time, so I'll try to time things so that we can have some discussion with him before he has to leave. Well, we'll start with Jeremy. So, Jeremy, your first film, first independent film, was called
Eclipse.
Eclipse, sorry, I had too much coffee this morning. Eclipse, and it was a critical success, but it was a very, the actual way into that film being developed was significantly different from Five Senses. Can you give us some background on it?
Yeah, well, Eclipse was my first feature, and like most first features, it was quite a difficult thing to get off the ground. It was a script that I'd kind of worked on for maybe about 2 years. Starting with a very sort of conceptual idea that I wanted to do a sort of La Ronde structured film where you have 2 characters in the first scene who meet, and then one character goes off and meets a new character, then that new character meets another character in the next scene, and the final character that's introduced meets the first character from the beginning of the film, which closes the circle. And this is a structure that is quite familiar from the play La Ronde by Arthur Schnitzler, and also has been used in a lot of different dance and music and other performance pieces. And I like the idea of being able to tell a kind of multi-narrative story and being able to deal with larger themes in this sort of prismatic way, where so you have a lot of different points of view on a certain subject. But because it had such an unusual structure for a feature film, it was kind of hard to, I guess, convince people that it was something that was worth doing and that could potentially reach an audience. And I had done a number of short films before that had been very well received, and some shows for television. I'm sorry, I have a cold, you'll have to excuse me. But at the same time, it was still considered kind of a risky venture. The film was being produced by Camelia Freiberg, who had worked with Adam McGoyan and produced all his films, and has produced all his films up until the most recent one. And, we had some interesting cast involved, and some good crew people involved, but still it was a very difficult thing to do. So we received a bit of development money to get the script going, but at a certain point we couldn't get it into production. So we've been turned down by everybody in the sort of traditional sources in Canada, Telefilm Canada, the Ontario Film Development Corporation, et cetera, et cetera. We got a small grant from the Canada Council, but it wasn't quite enough to make the movie. So, as luck would have it, we did get invited to the Cinemart in Rotterdam, which is a sort of great thing that everyone should know about if you're doing independent films. It's an event that brings together producers and directors who are developing projects with potential investors, where they're foreign sales agents or television buyers, people who can get involved at various stages. Some people go there with a script, some people go there with a semi-finished film. You can go at any stage.
And your film was what, at what stage when you went to Rotterdam?
It was a script, a finished script. We were ready to shoot it, and we had some elements attached. And these are elements that wouldn't mean anything in terms of the American market, but might mean something in the foreign territories. Certain actors, Canadian actors that might be recognizable from other films that have been distributed overseas. So in fact, we ended up hooking up with a German company called Tima, And they actually had distributed a bunch of Canadian films in the past with some of the actors that we were casting in the film, and they were kind of intrigued. So they put our script at the top of their pile of things to read, and they read it quite quickly. And within a few weeks, we actually had a deal. We had all the production financing we need to make the movie, which is a kind of extraordinary situation. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was enough to get it in the can, and they were willing to take the risk that we would be able to raise the rest of the money once we had a rough cut. So it's quite an extraordinary situation that a company would do that under those circumstances, but I think because of Camelia's track record with Adam and the fact that they really loved the script and some of the actors that we were working with, they were willing to jump in. So that was very fortuitous, something that I would never count on happening again. But I was lucky, and it was, I think, maybe a testament to the fact that we really had a never-say-die attitude with the film. We just sort of figured, even though there weren't any traditional sources of funding for it, that there would be a way to get it off the ground.
So you had money to actually shoot, but not to finish the film.
That's right. So we got the film to a rough cut, and then at that point we had to raise more money. Unfortunately, the rough cut generated a certain amount of interest in a few areas. The most important one, actually, I'll drink.
Get you some lozenges.
I think we need some scotch up here.
Yeah, make it a double. One really nice thing that happened was that Camelia was invited to Cannes with Exotica, which she had produced, and we had a rough cut on tape of Eclipse. And Telefilm Canada at the time had a very nice booth at Cannes where people would come into often to look at Canadian films that were not actually part of the official competition, but that were available for distribution or available for festivals. And a bunch of festival directors actually came in and and saw the film that had been sort of talked up by Camelia and also by other people at Telefilm in the festival's office who actually quite liked the film, which is quite distinct from Telefilm, the production office, who wouldn't finance the movie. So anyway, we did have some supporters, though, which was kind of great, and a lot of people came in, and we ended up getting invited to Berlin and San Sebastian and a bunch of other festivals based on the rough cut, and that started to generate some interest. And then finally there was some Canadian distributor interest, and eventually Malofilm came on board and gave us some money, and then Telefilm and OTC kicked in a bit more, and we were able to finish the movie and launch it at the Toronto Film Festival. So it was kind of a nerve-wracking process because we never really knew at any point whether we were going to be able to continue, but we just had a lot of faith in the material that it would somehow all work out, and our German partner was extremely supportive all the way through. So somehow, we managed to, just paste it all together and had the movie, and then we launched it in Toronto and then went to Sundance in Berlin and the new directors of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the film had quite a successful festival career, and it was distributed in about 16 countries and got a very small boutique release in the US and a wider release here through Malofilm. And it basically kind of got me on the map. It wasn't a resounding success, but I think it made people take notice. It made it much easier for me to make a second film.
Now, specifically with the second film, so you've done Eclipse. Where did the beginnings of Five Senses go? Who approached you, or did you approach somebody with that, considering the success of Eclipse?
Fortunately, once Eclipse was done, somebody at Alliance, which is now Alliance Atlantis, sort of regretted that they hadn't been involved at the beginning and were very interested in working with me. And so they approached me about doing something else, and I had an idea of a project that I wanted to do, which was the Five Senses, and they were quite keen on it. And at the time, it was a very conceptual kind of idea. I didn't really know exactly where it was going to go, but I knew it was going to be 5 interconnected stories, each one having to do with one of the senses. And, they thought that was sexy enough, I guess, to get involved. So they came on board with development financing, and then Telefilm got involved. And it was actually a fairly smooth road after that. I mean, we had lots of bumps, as that you normally do with any production, but in terms of the interest around, around the project, that never really waned. And, all the people that had turned me down the first time were sort of ready to get on board with the second one, and that was kind of a nice thing.
So we should never underestimate the power of regret. So I'd like to move on to Alexander now and talk about Citizen Ruth, if possible.
Wait, I have a question. What do you mean by development funds? That means paying you to write the screenplay?
Basically, yeah, you make a development budget, which includes, writing fees, and if you're working with a story editor, and if you're doing
Do you write your own
research and travel.
screenplays?
I do, yeah.
Alone?
Yes, but I work with a story editor.
What's a story editor?
Well, Story editor can mean a lot of different things, but in my particular case, I work with a writer who happens to be a playwright and who's also an actor who's in all my films, and we have a very tight relationship, and he basically is kind of, well, in some ways he's sort of the bullshit detector, and in other ways he's just a kind of dramaturge. He comes from a theater background, so he sort of I approach screenplay writing in a sort of dramaturgical way, and so he functions.
So you kind of a sounding board for you in a way, and
Yeah, and we have
but he doesn't get credit.
He doesn't actually write.
Okay.
We just sort of bounce things off of each other all the time.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
Things are slightly different in the United States of America, our friends to the south. But, so Alexander, Citizen Ruth, radically unusual film for a first feature, really, an abortion comedy. So where did that come from?
It came from an article in the New York Times in February of 1992 that I had Jim Taylor, with whom I write, we were sharing a house at the time, and I had already read through the paper, and then he picked it up and read it and circled an article and said, "Did you see this article? Just not about a movie or anything, just, isn't this wild?" And I read it and I said, "Oh, this is a movie." And we wrote then the screenplay on spec for about 6 months, until, from basically March or April to the fall of '92, and then I had had an agent and some contacts based on a successful student film I had made 2 years previous, and I started kind of shopping this script around, and everyone said no. It's an abortion comedy with no likable people, at least ostensibly likable. And I was like, no, it'll be great, it'll be really funny. No. Or other people would say, oh, it's a great read, I laughed a lot, we'd never make it in a million years. And I went down the road with a couple of dead-end producers for a while, life-wasting producers. And by the way, if there's any, just for whatever it's worth, I learned never to get involved with a producer who hasn't previously produced a film. That's one piece of advice I would give. Don't, that leap of faith, wow, I believe in you, and you believe in me, and we're going to go do it, forget it. No, seriously, go with, if you ever, when you're trying to make a film, go with someone who's got at least a minimal track record. So finally, I was at a lunch to take I'd given up on it, and I was in despair, and I was going to rewrite something I'd written previous and go back to Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm from, and try to get that made. And I was at a lunch to discuss adapting a novel for a director, take a studio, a writing job. And I bumped into Kerry Woods, a producer who, when I first came out of film school, had made a run at me to work for his then studio, and I had taken a job writing, directing deal for another studio. But Kerry Woods never, unlike most of those people in Hollywood, he has actually a long memory. He's not just subject to his own, that kind of tunnel vision that a lot of those people have. So he said, "Oh, Alexander Payne, how come you haven't made a movie yet?" I was standing over his table. I said, "I don't know. I just, I have this abortion comedy that nobody wants to make." And he said, "Send it, let me read it." So that was on a Thursday, and by Monday I got a call and he said, "I want to make it." Largely, though, because he remembered my student film and trusted me and believed in me. So I owe him a lot.
Can I ask you something now?
Yeah.
Did you have to extricate yourself from your previous producer relationships to do this?
Oh, they had already flaked out. I was on my own at this point.
Okay.
They self-immolated. They had self-destructed.
Wow, that's pretty spectacular.
So, but still, so finally what happened was Kerry Woods had gotten, he had tapped into these young, rich guys from New York, 30-year-old guys who had been endowed by their parents, and they financed, no, this is true, they financed Kids. Right. Larry Clark's movie Kids for $2 million, and they had sold it to Miramax for $3 million. They'd made a profit of $1 million, and then they were going to take their little film enthusiasm and then finance Citizen Ruth for $2 or $3 million. But they got cold feet, and by the time they got cold feet, this was now, I finished the script in '92. This is now early '95. Still took 18 months after Kerry Woods saying, yes, I'll make it. It took 18 months from then to the first day of photography. But anyway, for whatever reason, those guys got cold feet. But by that time, Laura Dern's deal had been made, and Burt Reynolds' deal had been made.
I can actually tell you why they got cold feet, because Carrie's involved in the sale of my film, and it's because Miramax never paid.
Oh, they didn't?
The
They didn't
$3
pay
million
those
for kids.
to
They sold it for $3 million, but I know a year after the film had actually been released, they had yet to actually see a cent from Miramax, which would probably explain
Did
the
you
cold
meet those
feet.
guys?
No, I didn't meet those guys, but I met Carrie, and
Right,
he was
right.
extremely angry at Miramax.
Huh, that's a strange story. You don't usually hear stuff like that about Miramax.
No.
That's funny.
A fine company and possibly a
Luck of
future
the draw, I
sponsor of
guess.
the trade forum.
Anyway, so finally, though, Kerry Woods had a bunch of deals in place with Miramax, and in a Lincoln town car in Midtown Manhattan said to, what's his name, Harvey Weinstein said, I have these deals, we've got all these other things in place, and Miramax had already passed on it like 4 times, and Kerry goes, please, 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 help me save face, and Harvey said, over his shoulder, oh, all right. That's the sinew on which my destiny hung. Really, just a little piece of dental floss. So,
In a Lincoln town car, though.
anyway, and then financing came, and it was a negative pickup, and then we made it.
Yeah, but within that, you had Laura Dern attached, you had Burt Reynolds attached. It was your screenplay with your writing partner. Now, at what point were you having any influences outside of your own, any other controls that were on you on Citizen Ruth? I mean, it sounds like you were actually in pretty much full creative control at that point.
Yeah, of course not in my contract, but there was a little wrangling over a tiny bit of casting, but actually I had a really good experience with Miramax in that it's my cut to the frame, and after a certain, most of the casting is completely mine, and I got to shoot it where I wanted, how I wanted, and I think also Miramax it was the first time they had gotten really busy with a ton of projects shooting. And mine was so cheap, and just Kerry Woods was kind of off doing it that I was under the proverbial radar. So, and they didn't actually get involved creatively until its premiere at Sundance, where there was some wrangling about the title of the film. But it was sort of no big deal, and it was worked out. So,
so could you hand those to our dear friend? This is now a commercial for Halls. Okay, Citizen Ruth now, you're at the Sundance Film Festival. Critical acclaim. What happened with the film?
Oh. Well, yeah, we premiered it at Sundance of '96 and got some nice momentum, which Miramax immediately capitalized on and released it in December of that year, fully 12 months later.
So how did the film do financially?
Actually, one of the things they then used to market it was that it won Best Actress at Montreal that year, the Montreal Festival. Laura got it. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, the film did extremely well critically. I don't know how many people saw Citizen Ruth, but it's a very unusual, extremely intelligent film, very dark, but also quite just fascinating. And the critical acceptance of the film was substantial. What happened in release? How did Miramax handle it? Did it make money? Did it help you move on to your next picture?
What helped me move on to my next picture was the critical acceptance and the fact that I think a lot of people in Hollywood liked it. Mm-hmm. It was, again, one of those things where very often in Hollywood they like those, specifically executives and financiers, like movies that they themselves never would have made. No, it's true. And, but commercially it completely tanked. And I'm not saying that it's a brilliant film or that it's great or that it's appealing to an audience. I'm sure it's a heart satire and no, really huge current stars. And it's a tough sell, granted, but in the marketing they also fumbled, I feel, because because of its, let's say, dark nature. They opted for kind of a bait and switch, which is make it seem like a happy, bouncy, fun comedy, and just get them in the theaters. And so then you end up not even getting the audience who really would like the film. And they didn't put a lot of money into marketing it either.
So did you had control of the film really up until they took it into the marketplace?
Yeah, which I'm sort of okay with, because I'm just happy to make it. And yes, I want it distributed well, but I also need to get onto another film.
Right, which brings us to Election. Now, what happened after Citizen Ruth that got you to Election? Did you develop Election and go somewhere? Did people come to you with Election?
I had just finished mixing Citizen Ruth when I was sent, material kind of trickles in, and I had been sent a novel by a couple of producers whom I knew socially. And I was told it took place in a high school, and I didn't want to read it. I didn't read it for about 2 or 3 months because it's set in a high school, and I'm completely uninterested in high school movies, or even in high school really as a milieu. But Albert said, no, just read it, just read it, an unpublished novel. So I read it and liked it, and thought it would be a good thing for Jim and me to write. Gave us the kind of raw material about how just of these pathetic people that we like to deal with. So we did, and that was then our first experience. These producers, just to answer your question, these producers had found this novel, set it up at MTV Films, which is in turn set up at Paramount. They're all owned by Viacom. Mm-hmm. And MTV Films, a fairly new production entity, had responded to it, I think, because of the young people, high school nature of it. And then that was then my first experience with developing something for a studio, writing something for a studio, and then having them make it. And I can talk about that experience later in the panel.
Now we're going to move over to Mr. Doug Liman and talk about Swingers. And where did that come from? Also, could you please touch briefly on Kerry Woods, because both you two have a relationship with Kerry Woods, and obviously had assisted in your first film.
In the case of Swingers, Kerry didn't get involved until the film was done and already had bidders. So to start with Kerry would start very late in the process, to say the least. I was unemployed in LA trying to make a go of it. I'm a New Yorker and had gone there to break into the film business, and it's no picnic, that's for sure. But I was in there every day fighting for survival, and I met a actor at a party. I'd moved in with, one of the problems with living in LA, I'm from New York, and in New York it's like relatively normal existence, and you go to the park like on the weekends and you play touch football with your friends, and there's stuff like that. In LA that doesn't really exist, and the guys are like extremely sort of effeminate, and I mean I'm like not like some macho guy, but
I think you're pretty macho.
No, but like people, I mean I don't, especially since I'm not, like, I don't tend to watch sporting events on TV. I need to be surrounded by people who do. Like, I won't watch football on a Sunday afternoon unless, like, my friends are watching, and then I'll sort of participate in that. And so I was really missing that in LA. And I was being forced to move through a bad landlord situation, and I decided that I had two sort of female friends in LA, and I thought they were like very cute and like actively trying to find like guys. Like they dress up and go out, and like really it was like a really important part of their lives. And I figured if I move in with them, like I'll be surrounded by the kind of guys that I'm looking for. And because actually my roommate before was your executive at MTV Films, Elisa Koplovitz. And I don't know if you know her husband now, who's, you know, an executive. Like, she bought him like cufflinks for his birthday when they first started dating. And those are like the kind of guys who were like coming by. But these girls were clearly going to attract a different caliber of man, you know. And I would, you know, like there'd be like, you know a boyfriend was on their way because you'd hear the motorcycle from down the block and that kind of thing. And so we moved in together, and the first, there was a party that Saturday night at a very successful screenwriter's house who's a friend from, who also started struggling in LA with me, but had achieved, you know, a lot of financial success, but not critical success with a number of screenplays. And we went to, and his name is Zach Penn, and he had written Last Action Hero, which had sort of catapulted him, and then he wrote a film called, oh God, it's the one with Jon Favreau in it, PCU, thank you. And so we went to a party at his house, and my two roommates were dressed to like meet guys, and the first guy like through the door, like we got into the party, came right over, was Jon Favreau. And he really started working it hard, and he was the character from Swingers. Literally identically, and he was, you know, he was hysterical, and you know, he's like a big guy, and he seemed like the kind of guy that, like, you know, the whole idea, I have two female roommates, so if they each brought home a guy, we'd be like one person short of touch football on a Sunday afternoon. And he seemed like a great guy, and I said, you know, I'd be really psyched if I bumped into you on the way to the bathroom in the middle of the night, so keep at it. And he did not succeed in betting either of my roommates, because he literally was like the character out of Swingers, and he was his own worst enemy. But we all became friends from that night, and because he didn't give up that night, he would sort of keep hanging around, and we all became friends, and he eventually showed my roommate Nicole the script of Swingers that he'd just sort of written on his own and hadn't even shown his agent, and she loved it, and she convinced him to show it to his agent. He had an acting agent, and you know, things really weren't going well for him, and they, I mean, they were going much worse for other people in the film, like Vince Vaughn, but they, you know, it wasn't like he was, all his auditions were for roles that had the word fat in either the character name or in the character description, and they started working on the script, and John was like a friend, and we were both out of work, and we go to the Derby on Wednesday nights, and that was like the one positive thing to being out of work in LA is you can go out really late on like a weeknight, whereas like all the suits can, until you sort of make the most of it. And I had a long distance relationship, and so I would have to invite other people to come dance with me on a Wednesday night because I wasn't good enough, and then John would hit on those people, and I really got to experience the whole Swingers film before I ever read the script, and it was about 6 months after we met that he asked me to take a look at the script, and you normally don't. I mean, that's 6 months when I've heard him, we've been talking about it together. We actually went to Sundance together, and he was like peddling the script to Swingers there, and I still hadn't read it, because it's like not a good thing to read your friend's screenplays if you can, you know, if you can avoid it. And because odds are they're not going to be all that good, and it's, but eventually he showed it to me to read about three months after we'd been to Sundance together, and I immediately fell in love with it. And I think, you know, I had a huge advantage reading the script that nobody else reading it had, which was that I had actually seen the movie. I mean, and while, you know, and the first sort of person in the business I actually showed it to was the person who did your film, Elisa, who, you know, been my housemate, and she was at MTV, and I mean, she hated the script, said, I don't understand it, it's like about nothing. It's like this guy like waiting for his ex-girlfriend to call, and I said, no, you don't get, it's like, and I realized like that what I was responding to wasn't so much in the script. It was in Vince Vaughn and in Jon Favreau, who, if you didn't know them and you were reading the screenplay, you wouldn't necessarily get that. So I decided that I would, and I became, so I'm sort of taking a little offense when you say don't trust a producer who's never produced anything, because I immediately turned to John and said, I want to produce this and I want to direct it, and I've already got the money, and I want to do it really cheap so that you guys can be in the film. And his agent was really against that and really wanted to be somewhere with someone who had a track record as a director and someone who had a track record as a producer, and this was not a great deal. I was offering to buy the script for $1,000, but John would get to be the lead. And not only would he get to be the lead, I would only do the deal if he was the lead. So it really was it was a good creative situation. It just wasn't a good business situation. And ultimately, through about a month of just hammering his agent every day, she finally agreed to let me buy the script. And so he took a total chance on an unproven producer. And the moment they said yes, I had the $1,000 for the script, but I didn't have the money for the film, and it turned out actually to be, I only wanted $200,000 to do the film, and it turned out to be much harder to raise than I figured, that take like a couple of phone calls or something, but if I was guaranteeing like a 35 millimeter finished film, but we ended up finally, it only took about 5 weeks to raise the money, which seems like very little time looking back on it, but when you're in the middle of it, we were crying, it was an extremely painful 5 weeks.
Where did this money come from, Doug?
The money came from a sort of an investment banker type person in New York, and then from a sort of wheeler-dealer kind of bottom-feeding producer in L.A. And you're making some compromises. The sister of the wheeler-dealer producers in the film, and she's actually perfect for the role. But there were like, and then you're selling your soul a little bit. You don't, but you do whatever you have to do to get the film made, and as long as it's not compromising what ends up on the screen, and it's just compromising the quality of your life, it's okay.
Did you? I hate to ask. Did you maintain total creative and outside of one or two casting choices?
One casting choice, and it really was we would have cast her anyhow. It really would have been a difficult decision if this person hadn't been right for the role. Mm-hmm. They wanted her to be like in Heather Graham's role, and she wasn't right for that. But other than that, there was no. If you're the director and you've raised the money, who else is gonna? No, who else is going to tell you what to do to the film?
Well, it could be somebody in the back of a Lincoln Town Car by the
Well, then we did sell the film to Miramax, which, is like a dream come true for an independent filmmaker, and it really was overall the experience at Miramax was very positive, and one of the reasons it was so positive was because Cary Woods had gotten ripped off by Miramax on Kids. And we didn't get into the Sundance that your film showed at. We were rejected. And so 3 weeks later, we just arranged a screening of the film in Los Angeles at the $2 theater on Fairfax. And we pumped the film really aggressively in advance, and we did little teaser screenings 2 weeks in advance, because we hadn't shown the film to any of our friends, even like people like Elise, or like my closest film friend in LA. Nobody outside the process had been allowed to see the film, so that we knew that we could get one good screening where we had a very loyal audience who would respond enthusiastically, as opposed to your friends have already seen it once and they're seeing it for the second time, and it's a comedy. It's important that you get like a fresh audience. And So that was I'm really glad we made the decision to keep people out of the editing room, even though, we were really proud of the film. We wanted to show it. We restrained ourselves. And, bless you, the only thing we did was we held a screening at my agency and at John Favreau's agency, UTA, 2 weeks before our screening, because we didn't want to have this amazing screening with like all of our loyal friends and friends of the cast and crew there, and not have any distributors in the room, and have them just hear about this film, and then they have to see it like in an empty screening room. So we did these 2 teaser screenings, knowing that my agency and John's agency would never say anything bad, and then the film plays really well to an audience, so we got a lot of heat and buzz out of those 2 screenings, so that paid off. And although the night of the screening we were expecting 1,200 people, but we chose a theater that had a screening room that held 700 and then a second one that held 500. And we didn't tell anyone we had 2. Because again, you want to make it seem like it's like overflowing. And you're like, if we're really in trouble, we'll open the second screening room. And it was raining, and only about half the people who promised they'd be there showed up. So we still got to have like a room that was packed. And by the next morning, we had, that night, I thought I didn't think the film, it was my first time seeing the film in front of an audience. And I really didn't feel that good about how it played. And we'd had this whole strategy that we weren't going to look desperate to sell the film. So we had rented a bus, literally it was like our last dollars, to pull up outside the theater. And when it ended, all of the guys from the film and Nicole, who produced the film with me, and other key crew people, were all going to leave the theater and just get on the bus, and we were going to Vegas. and to really not give the impression of being desperate at all. And so we did like a little bit of schmoozing outside the theater. I didn't think anything was really going to come of it, so we just started drinking heavily. And we never made it to Vegas, which is just as well, because the next morning the phone started ringing, and there were people who, all these people will call you and tell you they want to buy your film, because those are like the low down or middle people whose job it is to say that, so that in case their bosses want to buy the film, like they've already taken you to dinner or lunch or schmoozed you. And one of the calls we got the next day was from Carrie Woods, who'd been at the screening the night before, and said, I saw your film and I'd like to take you to lunch and become a producer on it. And this is like exactly what your parents like warn you about before you go out to Hollywood, It's like, it seems just so sleazy. Like the film's done. You already have, studios calling to arrange screens for their higher-ups. But Carrie had bought the script to Scream about 8 months before, and Elisa had actually shown it to me, and she had lost it in bidding to Carrie. And my agents had said now that Carrie had it, I would never have a shot at doing that. And I figured, well, now this same person they told me I'd never get anywhere near is calling me up, so I went to have lunch with him. And I said, I'll make a deal, because the one advantage of being the producer-director is like you'll sell the film out for a good chance at another directing job. And it turned out, Scream was already set up and going to production the next week. So I mean, now I was just going to get a free lunch, and Carrie managed to convince me by the end of the lunch to still bring him on as an executive producer. And the single best thing he did was he was so pissed at Miramax that he jacked their price up from, they were the first people to bid, and they ended up being the only people to bid. And he jacked them up from $1 million to $5.5 million, bidding against themselves. And not only that, it was in the deal that we had to be paid the same week that the deal closed. So whereas Kids, he still hadn't received his money from Kids, and now at that point it had been, year and a half since it had been released or something. We actually got paid that, he got his commission on that, and it was, so that, and he really did bring a lot, and he helped us maneuver through the post-production experience at Miramax and marketing.
Holy cow. I'm going to go over to Jeremy now, and we're going to talk about the development of the five senses. And where we left off, Jeremy had just had Eclipse do extremely well critically, and we were talking about the development of the film. Now, you actually went to these people who had deep regrets about not working with you in the first place, and you started working on Five Senses. So what happened? How long did it take to actually get to a place where you were comfortable with the screenplay? At what point did Alliance Atlantis start to play with you?
Well, it took me a while to get happy with it. I think because both of the scripts that I've done that have been produced are developed in such an organic way that I didn't really know where I was going when I started. You know, I just started with a kind of abstract idea, then I eventually figured out what the movie was really about and what it wanted to be about, you know, almost on its own. So, you know, going through that process takes a bit of time. And I was doing other things in the meantime, directing a little bit of television, doing some music videos and stuff like that. And I was, you know, quite committed to making this film, but I felt that it needed the time to just kind of gestate, and I'll speak more clearly. So that took a bit of time, and I guess I had a draft that I was kind of okay with in about a year after Eclipse was finished. And then we got invited to the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, which was a nice thing to do, and developed the script further. And I think, you know, shortly after that, I think we were sort of feeling that it was time to kind of get the movie into the next stage and get it produced. So there was we had a little bit of a problem at Alliance at the time because the person who had made the development deal with us actually got fired, not because of the development deal, but she got fired later. And there was a new regime there, and they didn't have that much invested in the project. So it took a long time to convince them to stay on board and to push the film into production. And we had one big champion there, who was Charlotte Mickey, who's great. She was head of acquisitions at the time, and she really loved the project always. She just wasn't able to greenlight it herself. So finally, you know, after a lot of back and forth and a little bit of rewriting and some casting and all that stuff, we were finally able to get it into production.
Now, between Eclipse and Five Senses, you were directing commercial work and music videos and doing some television, which is not a bad way to put some money in the bank. Did Alliance put any money forward into the production as far as supporting you?
Into the development, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so did Telefilm at the time.
So after that, well, you're sitting in a position now where this is an international cast. It's actually, I believe, an international co-production.
It's technically not a co-production, but we did have some pre-sales,
No.
3 or 4 pre-sales.
How did you arrive at the cast, and was that your choice?
Well, the casting was sort of built in terms of the international aspect, except for Mary Louise Parker. That role wasn't specifically written for an American actor. But the film is dealing a lot with people who are trying to connect and and the film is attempting to show that the subjects of the film, that theme and others as well, are universal. And it was important to me to kind of show people from different cultural backgrounds, people who speak different languages, people who have different personal histories, all kind of grappling with the same issues. So, and also language was something that I really wanted to play with, as I did in my first film, as something that sort of can bring people together but can also divide them. And so there's scenes in the film that are in Italian, there's scenes in the film that are in French. And there's, I think a sense that the film is very sort of international and cosmopolitan, and that does sort of reflect in a particular way the society that I grew up in Toronto, which is very multicultural, and as opposed to the American melting pot, there's very much this Canadian cultural mosaic thing where, people retain their cultural identity quite strongly while living in Canada. So I wanted to represent all that stuff quite fully. And so it was written into the script that there would be an Italian character and a French character. And I didn't want to do the sort of phony baloney casting where you hire an American actor who sort of speaks Italian and a French actor who can, do Kevin Kline and Forget Paris or whatever that movie was. So I went to Paris, actually, and I met a lot of French actors and worked with a French casting agent and cast Philippe Voltaire, who was in The Double Life of Veronique by Kieślowski and had also been in Cyrano and Le Maître de Musique and quite a few good films. And then I went to Italy and worked with an Italian casting director to cast the Italian role and ended up casting Marco Leonardi, who had been in Cinema Paradiso and like Water for Chocolate.
How long did you spend in each city?
Oh, it was very quick. I was there for like a week in each place. And I had a whole bunch of meetings. It was actually quite well organized.
Oh, who did was that through Alliance Atlantis? Or?
No, that was completely my own thing. I think that, Alliance Atlantis was quite supportive of my, I guess, how committed I was to doing this sort of interesting casting process. But it wasn't something that they would have necessarily insisted on, that's for sure. But I thought it was a really good thing to do, and I wanted to get cast that would actually help sell the film in those countries, because I certainly perceived that the audience for this movie would be an international audience, and that it might be a difficult sell in the U.S., but if we could sort of put it together with international sources of financing and that the film felt that it could sell afterwards internationally, that might be helpful.
So you actually had an enormous amount of latitude and control over your cast. What about the screenplay itself? How were the various parties that were involved in financing the film working towards that? Because that's where things can get derailed fairly heavily, as you know.
Well, there were some problems, like in that sort of regime shift. There was a bit of a problem with the script, where the new guy in charge basically just didn't get it. He sort of thought the script was interesting, but it just didn't really connect. And it took a long time to convince him that it was going to work. And, there were some changes that were made in the script, not just because of him, but just the natural development of the material. But I think eventually, just because so many other people came on board, including Sundance, and we also got invited to Cinemart again and to the IFFM No Borders program in New York, which is sort of extension of Cinemart, there was like a lot of external stuff that was sort of supporting the material. So I think that helped him get over his reticence about the material. And then once we were attracting cast like Molly Parker and Mary Louise and the other actors that we had involved, I think they had a bit of a comfort level, so they weren't overly concerned at that point about how tricky the material seemed to be.
Now, was the film financed through the Canadian system of Telefilm, OFDC, and Alliance?
There's no FTC any
Atlantis?
money anymore, so sadly. But it was put together through a combination of Telefilm Canada, TMN, the Movie Network, the Harold Greenberg Fund, Alliance Atlantis putting up a big chunk, but Alliance's investment was completely supported by pre-sales, or almost entirely supported by pre-sales.
So even though they were dealing with market pressures, they were still letting you have the latitude to keep control of the film.
Yeah, well, I think the other partners had a lot to do with it too, because they were very supportive, and their agenda is like purely creative. They don't have, they have a commercial agenda, but it's not their number one agenda. I think because Alliance basically had their back end covered with pre-sales, they weren't too worried about it. They were worried, of course, and they were, involved in every aspect of the film, but they pretty much let me go. And I think that they really liked my first film quite a lot, everybody who was there, and I think they trusted my instincts, and working with Camelia, they trusted that she would keep things on track. And, I think they had enough comfort level to just kind of let it go.
That was the emergency exit.
I know.
Ooh. Now, Jeremy, so the film is finished, let's say, now, and you went to Cannes with it, where it was received extraordinarily well. Did you have any idea what was going to happen? I think it was your first screening, in fact.
It was, because we had submitted the film to Cannes before we were finished. It was at a kind of almost a fine cut stage. And they ended up inviting it based on that. So we had to really motor to get the film finished, because it was a very, very tight schedule. And we really literally finished the film like the week before we went, and we didn't have time for a cast and crew screening or anything. So we'd had like some preliminary screenings when we were at different cut stages, just to kind of see how we were doing with the development. But
You mean test screenings?
yeah, kind of my version of test screenings, which is not really a test screening, but we get in people that we like and trust and whose opinions we care about.
You weren't in a shopping mall in Scarborough?
No, we didn't do that. And so we went to Cannes, and you never really know with a movie. I was happy with the film, and people seem to be fairly happy with the film, but it is an unusual film in a lot of ways, and I didn't really know how it was going to connect. And specifically, Cannes is like this whole big mythic thing, and for me, it really meant a lot symbolically.
I don't know if you're aware, he was actually invited to Director's Fortnight at Cannes, which is an extraordinary honor to be given to a film director, and certainly deserved.
Well, I was very excited about it, but at the same time, you know that it could go either way. You know, like there are movies that are there and they just tank, you know, and everybody hates them and people boo, and they're very vocal there, you know. So, like if they don't like it, they let you know they really don't like it. And so, it was kind of a pretty stressful way to premiere the movie, but at the same time, it was very exciting. So we went and we just had like an amazing response. It was really, really great. So, we were very lucky. And then things just kept moving after that.
So what happened directly after Cannes?
Well,
It's
a lot of stuff happened
3
at
or 4
Cannes.
months between then and the Toronto Film Festival, where the film did quite well as well.
Well, we right away got invited to 1 million festivals, and we were invited to open the Perspective Canada program of the Toronto Film Festival. And also, there was kind of like a few different things happening. Like one was for the career of the movie, and the other one was my career, which was sort of moving into a new arena, because I got approached by a lot of American agents and American companies really interested in the movie, but also interested in what I was going to do next. And so I just took a whole bunch of meetings, and my phone was ringing, and all that kind of stuff, which was kind of great. A little bit strange for me, because I hadn't really experienced that before with my first film. I mean, I had a certain amount of success, but it wasn't like this, which was almost like overnight, like the day after the film screened, because we had a big standing ovation at the screening, and word got around. And Cannes is very buzz-oriented, so when something goes over well, it's like, the next day everybody knows about it, and it's this huge thing. So, I mean, literally for the next, 4 or 5 days in Cannes, I was just like meeting after meeting, and, it was very exciting, but I just felt like this, amazing ramp up, in everything in my life. It was very, very strange.
Well, so what are you going to do now, though? I mean, you've got a very successful second film, which has an enormous critical acclaim both in Europe and in North America now. Are you developing your own project, or and how is that being approached?
Well, there are 2 projects that I've been working on through the development of the 5 Senses. And one is an original script, and one is a book that I optioned about a year and a half ago. And so I'm kind of in the process of developing those 2 things, and people are now sending me other things, and most of it isn't very interesting, but there's one project actually that's really quite good, a book that I might work on, and I'm just kind of taking it a little bit easy, I guess. We now have to deal with the release of this movie, which is quite a big deal.
Yeah.
I got picked up by Fine Line in Toronto, and it's going to open in the U.S. in the new year, and it's opening here at the end of October, and it's opening in Europe all over January, February, March. So there's a lot of stuff to attend to with that. But I'm kind of slowly writing away and reading other things that are coming in, and I'm hoping to have something that I want to shoot within a year.
Will you be maintaining your connection with Atlantis then?
Yeah, I mean, now we get along great, and big surprise. They're very happy with the movie, and they'd like to do something else with me, and I'd like to work with them too. So if there's a way to make that work, then we'll do that for sure.
Excellent. I'd like to just move quickly on to Alexander and talk about the development of Election, in which after Citizen Ruth, again critically acclaimed, not necessarily a financial success, but a very specific satirical, darker film. Now we move on to Election, which is again a darker film. How did that come to you, and how did the development of that project evolve?
Well, I already explained about the part how the novel was sent to me, and I've agreed to adapt it and direct it. It was my first experience with working with a large studio with material they owned that I was attached to and was going to direct. On the script side, it was fine. We sit in the meetings and nod and say yes, 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 and then do what we want. And no, it's actually how it works, and it was all fine, and it was very much, I think because of Citizen Ruth, and they kind of knew what they were getting in hiring Jim and me, that we were given a lot of leeway. And also, since I was going to direct it, I'm not just the hired writer, I'm the director. I say, no, I really think it should be like this, and here's why, and it was fine. The trouble came in then on the directing side, moving from a finished screenplay to actually getting behind the camera, and that took a year. And the reason for that is that once at a big studio, once the creative executives say, oh, we love this script, let's make it, that then they show it to the marketing side, and then the marketing people who have never heard of it until then say, oh, there aren't any protagonists you can root for, and it doesn't have a happy ending, and how do we sell it, and we don't know, and how much, and maybe if you get Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks, and the life-wasting bullshit kicks in.
So a year of life-wasting bullshit.
A year of having to go send it to Tom Cruise and wait, and they're never going to do it in a million years, but they make you do it, and it's like the worst thing they can say to you is, we love your script, we love your film, and we think others are going to love it too, like Tom Cruise. You're going to make it anyway. So, and then about how much money it's going to cost, and I'm telling you, if the thing had been written on spec, it would have been shot about 8 months sooner than it was shot, because they own it and they have the right to sit on it, they have the right not to make it, they have the right not to give it back to you and turn around. And for a while I wanted to dynamite the studio. But all of this from nice people who are just doing their job, and it's just how, but when you're a director and you have all your eggs in one basket at that time and want to just get shooting, you know it's going to be good, and it's like, please, let's just be real, and let me have Matthew Broderick, he'll be great, and then the budget, and then I could go into a lot more details of specifically and other producers brought on and all that kind of stuff, but long story short, finally, a year later, production started with the cast I wanted. And
That's a year after you delivered a script that you were happy with.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
Broderick
10
was-
months. 10 months.
Was Matthew Broderick your first choice?
Well, really, I hadn't written the script with anyone in mind, and then when it was like, well, what huge star can we get? I did agree that Tom Hanks would be excellent in that part, so he was the first kind of person we pursued, because obviously the studio would love Tom Hanks, and I think he'd be great, you know, kind of iconically too in that part. And then some other names came and went, but finally Sherry Lansing agreed that Matthew Broderick is a star, and can...
Heavens.
No, it's actually, they said, oh, he's a star. And then there was no discussion ever about Reese Witherspoon. They were aware that her star was rising, and I had met her in a meeting, and had been very impressed by her. So after we had those two, I mean, after we got through that thicket, it was smooth sailing. I mean, I bellyache a lot, but then it was smooth sailing, and the rest of the cast was completely mine. There was no approval or anything. I just cast the rest of the movies I wanted, and again, made it in Omaha the way I wanted it with my crew, and like that.
So you managed to actually maintain your creative team from Citizen Ruth, which is no mean feat when you're making a transition like this. The number
I had the same production designer, DP, editor, composer, prop master, assistant cameraman. I would have had the same costume designer too, but he was busy.
Right. Now, and in Citizen Ruth, you have a handful of producers.
No, on Election I have a handful.
I mean, is it on Election? It's the other way around.
Citizen Ruth had 2 producers credited, and Election has, I don't know, 30?
30. It's close to 30. And
that's like 8. It's like 7 or 8.
If you do a web search on these people, it is fascinating. So how many of these people actually did anything?
They all did something.
Something.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, 2, for example, Albert and Ron found the book and set it up at MTV and thought of me. David Gale runs MTV Films. Keith Samples was brought in to be the enforcer, to kind of make the film and oversee it. And he hired this other guy as the line producer, who gets a co-producer credit. And then I'm missing a couple, but they all did something.
They're probably the ones who didn't do anything.
What?
Or they
The
may
ones
have,
you can't
they may have done
remember.
something important.
Yeah, yeah.
The one of them owned a Lincoln town car. Now, so casting-wise, then, after you got approval on Matthew Broderick, it was
And
pretty
Reese
much
Witherspoon.
it was pretty much yours then.
Yeah.
And what about the screenplay? Were there any significant changes made after the acceptance?
Yes. And that was also unfortunate. A week before shooting started, I got a call from Sherry Lansing that she had read it again and wanted me to tweak the ending. Yeah.
Did you?
We did, and it just got all diseased. And then we ended up shooting a new ending for the film a year later anyway. Whole brand new thing.
Was it closer to the original?
No, the original ending we had that she'd asked for tweaks on, which were fine, it was just to get it, more redemptive or whatever, was the original ending that had been in the novel, which we had adapted. But then this is a case where I was really happy to shoot a new ending because the way the movie turned out, the ending in the novel is quite lovely and melancholy, and the two, and I don't know how many of you have seen the film, but Tracy and Mr. McAllister kind of come to a sense of peace between them, which works in the book because the book is funny but also kind of ruminative and melancholy. The movie turned out much funnier than the book, and that ending did not seem earned, nor quite as interesting or emotionally or dramatically satisfying. So Jim and I, this is a great thing about Paramount, about working with the studio and having some deep pockets, is that they kind of said, well, put your heads together and come up with something else. So Jim and I did, and came up with an ending that is much closer to what we would have written had it been an original.
Now,
And then I had the money to shoot that.
if you shot that new ending a year later, how long was your post-production period?
A year, and well, I'm always slow editing anyway. Citizen Earth was 8 months, cutting sound and picture, and I spend a lot of time cutting because I shoot a lot of film. And
So those were your choices then to?
no, not with Election. When it was determined that I was going to shoot a new ending, there's a big studio process about getting to there because there are so many levels of people that another kind of life-wasting few months kicked in. And furthermore, by the time we determined a new script and budget for my reshoot, Matthew Broderick was shooting Inspector Gadget, so we had to wait another 3 or 4 months. So I just sat around.
How long was the reshoot?
4 days.
You had to wait a couple of months just to get them for 4 days?
6 months. All in all, between the studio, hemming and hawing, and waiting on Matthew is about 6 months.
During the actual production phase, how long did you have to shoot Election?
51 days.
51 days. And were you left alone, or did you have studio influences at that point? Were there any tremendously difficult situations during the production phase?
No. Actually, the studio was great during shooting because the producers, they're all there, and looking for something to get nervous about. But actually, I would talk to the executives at Paramount, and they'd say, wow, all the dailies look great, it all looks great. And I would say, what do you mean? I mean, I'm like 2 days behind. Why are you so sanguine? And they said, no, you're doing 25 setups a day, and it's going great, and we're all happy. It was fine. I mean, it's an $8 million movie.
Mm-hmm.
Which for them is so very little.
In Canada.
No, I know.
That would be the film industry.
No, I understand that.
That's, of course, a joke. But in post-production, now you finished the cut of the film. Before you shot the new ending, did you have to go through the test screening process, which is so monumentally exciting down there, where you do go to shopping centers and...
They don't do it at the shopping center. They do it on the lot. They insist that. Mm-hmm. But yes, I went through a few tests, which on the one hand, since I make comedies, I'm always happy about. I love testing films and showing it, not to get the cards or the numbers, it's the hideous part, but to just be and you filmmakers know this, you just sit there and you watch the audience watch the film, and you know when it's good and when it's bad and what you have to do to tweak the film. So I love that part. The bad side is, or the tricky side is, the weight and the importance that they give to these numbers, and it has a lot to do with what audiences are recruited to they bring in to see your film. And we had some conflict early on because they were thinking it was a high school film. They'd bring in a very young audience, when in fact that's precisely the group, like 16 to 20, with whom the film tested lowest. It tests higher with adults, with kind of 20 to 35 or whatever.
Did any of the people,
in general.
Did any of the people getting these demographics together watch the movie before they brought in the people?
I don't know.
I very much doubt it.
But after a while, though, I would start calling them all and say, get the right audience in there that really is our target audience.
So what, we hear frequently about the assistance of agents and producers. Were there any specific individuals in the development of Election that actually were critical to getting it done, or was this again pretty much you pushing forward on the material and also on the production?
There were some very good actions by some producers and my agent, but really it's me. I think it's always the filmmaker, really, who is responsible for pushing it forward.
Now, how was Election received? The film is completed, you have a new ending. It is a remarkably funny movie. And how did it go?
Thank you, David.
You're welcome. What happened to it as far as critical acclaim and the financial position that the film enjoyed?
Well, thank God I finally made a movie that people went to go see. It received very nice notices, and then it actually made money. Not a whole lot. I think finally domestically in the U.S. it made like 17 or something like that, 17 million. But it had cost 8 or 9, and then they spent 7 or so to market it. So they've already made their money, and then plus with foreign and video and airline and all that kind of stuff, it's in the black. All of which helps me.
Right. Now, what does happen now? Do you have another project or two in development?
I do.
Is that with the studio, or are you independent?
Well, funny you talk about phone calls and stuff, what happens after people see your film. I, who have usually been in active mode, now find myself more in reactive mode, and maybe you too, Doug, like stuff sent to me in books, and it's a big torrent of things after you have a film come out. For a short window, it goes away after a while, or at least it slows. But to that end, I mean, I have thought it's a nice, these windows of opportunity, though, come along only every so often. So I think I have been opportunist in putting things into development. Yes, I have like 5 things right now, 5 or 6, 4, all but one of which are connected to a studio or distribution entity. There's one which, a published book, which a producer and I have optioned on our own, and we're going to figure out what to do with that. But, like for example, the film which you were asking me earlier, which might be my next film, is with Fine Line, actually the adaptation of a Paul Auster novel. So.
Now, this is something that I'd like all 3 of you to consider before I go over to Doug. Is that genre is something that's either something you're really happy about being inside of, or it's something that you got caught in. How are you feeling about where you're at? You're directing comedies, arguably very difficult medium. Is that where you want to stay?
I don't know.
Well, so much for that question.
No, I mean, on the one hand, it's nice. Commercial has, I don't mind being known as something of a comedy director because there aren't too many of them, and it's considered a fairly specialized skill. But I'm interested in, I want to make westerns, actually. I want to make many different kinds of films, and I don't really, nor do I have them planned. It's such an instinctive process that you just go from film to film, but I don't want to think about it. But
You know, John Favreau has a Western script that if you're interested.
Great.
Maybe you're a writer, but and it's a comedy, too.
Excellent. It's fine. It's perfect.
It's not a single cowboy, I hope.
No, dark.
Oh. So actually, that's a good way to move over to
But
Doug
let me just,
Liman.
I have to say one thing, though, because the reason I asked you early on about what does development fund mean and writing a script, and you have an idea for something. From my experience, and you guys could disagree, my experience is if you really believe in your idea and you're not actually starving, to that spec is the better way to go, especially if you want to direct it, because then when it's, you know, like absolutely spec is the way to go, because then when it comes time to make the film, you send it around, and people who express interest in making it, you can say, thank you very much for your interest, I'm very happy you want to make the film. Would you make it with one of these 5 actors? If it does not proceed to production within X amount of time, it immediately reverts to me. And you just call the shots more, and you can control what's going on. The horrible thing about, I mean, for getting a salary up front for writing something is then they control what you write. They own the fruits of your labors.
But it depends, you know, if you find yourself being able to sell it to somebody who might be, you know, additive to the process, that may be the only way. You know, you don't have to take such a pessimistic view. You can also,
I don't think
you know,
it's
the studios
pessimistic.
they're really good people at certain studios. So if you know, if you want a certain producer to, you know, can be constructive to the evolution of the film process, you know, then you should set it up and get them involved. It's sort of, but you know, I'm also different because I'm not a writer-director, so I sort of depend upon a lot of outsiders coming into the process. But I've yet to successfully get something through the development process, but I do feel like a lot of extremely talented people are allied with studios, or in such a way that if you want to be in business with them, they're forever now wed to the process.
So in your case, with the development of Go, for instance, you finished Swingers,
Go doesn't fit that.
I was going to say,
Go doesn't fit that one, but the...
So who approached you with Go?
But I was, you know, there's the other thing is because I don't create my material, other people, you know, other people own things and they show it to you. You know, like you're getting inundated with material coming in. A lot of it comes, you know, with a studio's letterhead connected to it, and so you may not have the option of just saying, okay, I want to go off and do this on spec. So I wouldn't necessarily turn my back on that. On the other hand, I spent a year developing a film with Alicia Silverstone and Angelica Houston after Swingers. I was sort of doing half-heartedly. It was more like my agents were pushing me into it, and it was a great idea. The script just needed a lot of work, and I was going through my first experience of working with, you know, $1 million screenwriters, and it was really not a great experience, because when you pay somebody, they were literally paid $1 million to rewrite the script, and when you pay somebody that much money, it's like they won the lottery, and if you ask them to do any work, they get upset. Because it's so much money. It's like, I was actually rewriting a script that my cousin's also rewriting, and my cousin, you know, he's getting paid by like the week, and he's getting paid, you know, just a lot of money, but not, you know, not something that's just it's not $1 million. And so he's actually figured out like how much they're paying him per hour, and he's like neurotic about like making sure like they're getting their money's worth, which is great. And I do a lot of commercials in between my films, and I feel like, you know, the amount I get paid for a day of shooting a commercial, I'm like the whole day to make sure that they're getting their money's worth. But when you start paying somebody something about the $1 million, all of a sudden it's like, okay, you won, here's the check, and if you ask them to do anything, they start getting sort of cantankerous.
Damn them. So
I also was, for personal reasons, wanted to be in New York and not actually start a film. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like a good thing for me I needed to take time off, and that, you know, the development thing, you know, you go out to LA for a meeting and then you go away for 3 months and the writers work, and it fitted nicely. And then about the time when I said, all right, now I'm ready to start talking about making a film, and started spending more time working with the writers in LA on the Angelica Houston film, somebody sent me the script to go, and Swingers was an unusual film in that it was successful but it sort of became more successful over time. And so this sort of level of submissions didn't die off. 2 years after the film came out, Swingers is a hotter film and more helpful to me as a filmmaker than it was a month after it came out. And so my sort of system for evaluating just random scripts that came in was haphazard to say the most, to say the least. And it's gotten to the point where I'll actually find a script next to my bed, and it'll be for a film that opened the week before. So studios are actually managing to get films made faster and into theaters faster than I'm able to read. And really it's like a random thing how I sort of travel around with a very heavy bag of scripts, and then they get left random places, and new ones come, and it really is not a great system. But and the Ghost,
we won't be sending you a script immediately then.
and the Go thing was like a total fluke. I mean, I read the script and I really loved it, but I really had been through a period where I was I wasn't ready to systematically commit to something, and I wasn't really, it was just such I've been just through a lot of personally, and then also the whole Swinger success was sort of life altering. So I wasn't, I really loved the script. I was like, you love it. Does that mean you actually go make it, or do you just, is it one of these things you just love and don't do anything with? And so, well, I'll have a conversation with the producers, because they were going to, they had the, quote unquote, had the money in the bank to do like a $3 million film, and they wanted somebody right away, and I needed to tell them. And we set up a conference call, and I was, because I'm in New York, and I actually was on my way out to dinner, and I was waiting for the elevator, and the phone rang inside my apartment. And I was like, oh, should I go and answer or not? And the elevator wasn't there yet, and I said, well, I'll go, go answer the phone. And it was this conference call that I'd totally forgotten about. And by the end of the call, I was like, I'm in. So it's pretty terrifying that the elevator had, that, usually your fate was like in a Lincoln Town Car, but mine was like whether, somebody decided to walk their dog on 3, and therefore the elevator took longer to get up to 6. But I really, and then the studio that I was developing, Breakers, the Alicia Silverstone, Angelica Houston film for UA, and my agents really wanted me to do that film. I mean, it was just on a lot of levels, and part of it, say opportunities only come along once in a while, and you got to grab them. And sort of one of the sort of thresholds you have to sort of cross, at least according to your agents, is you have to do a studio film, because no matter how bad it is, it's like an insurance policy, because you'll now be able to get hired for the rest of your life on films, and that's like you can now be trusted to handle a $25 million budget. And so that's, and part of their job is, to protect you from yourself, and they really were pressing me to do Break. And I had a weekend where I had to decide between the two films. And, one of them is huge budget, already at a studio with 2 stars I really do like a lot. And one of them is this script with these unknown producers with $3 million and no cast. And part of the decision was that Elisa, who had read Swingers, who did your film, had hated Swingers, hated the Ghost script, and didn't get it. And this is why I need to make this film, because it needs, the film I see in my head when I read the script isn't the film that other people see when they read it, and therefore I've got a unique take on the material, and I should go make it. And I also was, it just seemed like too much money for Breakers. I didn't understand how that process was going to be all that interesting, because it's $25 million, and it's such a simple, easy shoot. Versus Go had these huge car chases, and I'd done Swingers for $200,000, so this was spending. This was sort of more in the realm of swingers. I understood what I needed when I showed up to work on Monday morning, because I was basically deciding over a weekend I was going to report somewhere on Monday morning. I knew what I needed to do on go. I mean, I understood like all these tasks that lay ahead of me before I could make the film. And on Breakers, I thought I'd just be sort of sitting behind this desk at you with my feet up, like just playing with the computer.
You had fairly complete control then over Go as far as your cast, and the screenplay when you were in production then.
Well, what happened was we had complete control over the casting, except that the producers had a film at Sundance. This all was going down like November, December, and I started the process in December, and we started casting, and they had a film in Sundance at the end of January that didn't sell. And then meanwhile we'd cast Katie Holmes in the film and Sarah Polley, and there are people who had been putting up the money for the film, had never heard of these actors. It's before Dawson's Creek aired, and it was actually a French company, so they should know better, but they hadn't heard of Sarah Polley, hear about her. And they pulled out, and so the film went bust. And Miramax, the producer actually didn't tell me that he'd lost his money and sent the script to Miramax on a Friday. And so you figured they did Swingers, they made a lot of money on Swingers, they'd sort of come in and help me. And I didn't know anything about this, and I showed up to work Monday morning, and they said, here's what happened. We lost our financing. We sent the script to Miramax. They passed, so we're shutting down. And it's about 6 weeks before we're about to start shooting the film. And it occurred to me that you should worry about, the producer says they have the money, like, you should trust them, but maybe, clearly I learned otherwise. One of the other producers had the screenwriter and myself and himself, the three of us sit in his office, and we just barraged the town that afternoon with screenplays, and everybody like really came together, and like production designer was running the Xerox machine, and it really was like a great sort of bonding experience for the team, that we were like fighting for our survival. And by the next morning, we had 5 studios bidding on the process. Tuesday afternoon, we had a meeting at my agency where they all came in. Each studio would come in and make their presentation as to why they should be the home for the film. And I went back to work Wednesday morning, and the producers continued the negotiation. We ended up selling it to Sony, to Columbia Pictures, and that deal closed that Thursday. So in both cases of Swingers and Go, they were very fast sells, less than 5 days.
5 days of hell.
It was exciting,
Yeah.
I'm in film because I like drama, so I really, when they said they lost the financing and that Miramax passed, my was like, life's about to get really interesting. Because I really had a belief that it would work out and end up in a better situation than we were in currently, and it was true, because budget went from 3 to 5, which I had been discovering that the car chase and things it was extremely tight to shoot the film on 3. It was still tight at 5, but that's what we did it at. The studio was amazing. They bought the film because they liked me and they liked Katie Holmes, and they said, do whatever you want with the rest of the casting. And as long as you do it within budget. There was an actor I wanted who cost more, and they wouldn't approve that, and so we couldn't cast him. And my only real problem is that they're part of these giant sort of multinational corporations, and if you're doing a film that deals with like underage drinking and sex and drug use, no one who has a product is going to want it featured in your film. And I have scenes in a supermarket, and there's obviously a lot of products in a supermarket, and the studio sent me a 40-page memo, single-spaced, of all the changes or specific things they expected to be done from the legal department there. So that Sarah Polley in the first scene says you can't put Windex in the same bag as food because it's poison. They have to change that to something generic, like bleach. which is the only line I actually changed. I mean, I did that that was the first day, and I regretted it immediately, and there was no way we could go back and change it. And because I started thinking back to, like, Swingers, and what if we had made that film generic? And there was a scene in a 7-Eleven, and they said, it can't be a 7-Eleven, it has to be a Vegas Mart. We'd gotten permission from a supermarket to film in it, and it was called John's. It's like a chain in L.A., and they made us change the name of the supermarket to Son's. They made us go, and that was like the cheapest, change one letter when you're changing the song, which is how John's came about, because there used to be Vons, and they bought some Vons, and they just changed one letter from a V to a J, which is why it's J-O-N-S.
I hate to do this, but we have a choice of either allowing, and he has to leave. We can either continue with Doug and have the panel.
That's pretty much
talk,
the end of the.
Or we can do questions. And geez,
it's pretty much
another 3 hours here.
No, that's the end of the saga. Other than that one thing that I really have a pet peeve with the studios, and I don't know if Alexander had that experience at MTV of.
Do you have a minute for a couple of questions? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that, but thanks, Jeremy. Okay, sorry about that, but we will open the floor to questions now. And I see one in the front.
I was just curious before that, if you had that experience.
Of what? Of having to change names for clearance?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time.
And you didn't get up there, you just dug something.
I try to come up with funny names for the new things. But thank God.
Legally they don't have the right, you legally don't need permission to feature a product in a film or use its name.
So why is it always comes from the legal department?
They're just protecting themselves from a frivolous lawsuit.
I see.
But it's not, this came up because there's a really funny line in my script about Calvin Klein that it smells like CK1, but it's not. And they said use the name, and I went to school with Calvin Klein's daughter, so I called her up, and she got me in touch with, like, the legal people at Calvin Klein. They said, they said, you don't need our permission to say that. And then I started realizing that the studios were way overreacting, and that, and I didn't change else in the script, and then they punished me by taking away my director of photography credit. But it really is something I feel like, something that should be stopped. That studios are, if they have like films taking place in generic locations, talking about generic things, and you can have characters in a film say Ford trucks suck, right? But according to a studio, you would have to change that.
But you don't legally.
You don't. No, of course people can say Ford sucks. Why? That's what people do. I say people have opinions. You're wrong.
I must remind the audience that these fine filmmakers are not lawyers. So the legal opinions expressed here, the legal opinions expressed are not the opinions of the Trade Forum. We have a question in the front here.
Since my work at Ford paid for my first film,
yes.
I've got a question for Doug. What led to you shooting? Did you have a DP for Swingers, and you ended up operating yourself? So
no, what led to me deciding to shoot was I had a friend I went to film school briefly, and I had a friend who was directing his feature, and he was doing it like in 12 days, for like $80,000, with actually some equipment and stuff from Canada. And I went to visit his set, and I watched them shoot this scene where the DP is spending like 15 minutes trying to like kill a flare off of a motorcycle with dulling spray. And I was like, look at this. I was like, there's no way he's going to get the coverage he needs to make this scene work with this amount, 12 days to shoot the film. It's like, live with the flare. And I swore at that moment that if I were doing visiting him, I was all excited. I said, this is great. He's empowering. He's not waiting for somebody to give him money, right? He's scrounging up like a ridiculously small amount of money to make a film in America, and he's just doing it. He's empowering himself. And I said, that's great, and that's what I'm going to go do. And then I visited him on the set, and I saw this going on. I said, I'm going to do it, but I'm I will not have a DP on my set, and there will never be dulling spray on a set of mine. And then on Go, actually, we had a flare problem, and I start using dulling spray. But
Okay. Well,
that's where it came from.
Okay, that's where it came from? Well, I had a picture of you when we were shooting the film because my background is a DP. And then as the writer-director, my first credit, my DP got busy. And I had a picture of Doug Liman with the Aton on my Aton case. So thank you very
thank
much.
you.
And
Another question. I have one if you guys don't. Ah, there's one. Right there. Thank you.
I just have a question for both of you. You touched a bit about casting choices in your first and your second one. How do you approach casting in the development process, or like the idea of what a character looks like to you, or who that character is in your mind? Do you have an idea, or do you just something walks in it and you see it? That's it, or?
I think it's both. For me, it's both. Sometimes I do, since I write, have ideas of how the character basically look like, although I never write with actors in mind.
And yeah, I mean, sometimes you get lucky and the person just walks through the door. And it's sort of a hit or miss. You know, I only spent 7 Go, but we spent 5 months casting it. So it's, but there's a really large cast in Go because it's got 3 separate storylines, but it's literally just seeing people and having them read the thing, and sometimes they're totally different than what you had in your head, and sort of it's the toughest probably. Alexander probably has the problem more because he's actually writing it. Like the roles that you're totally sure exactly who it is, and you've got this picture in your head, not of an actor, but you just totally see the person. Those roles are the hardest to cast. And I was like, look at this. I was like, there's no way he's going to get the coverage he needs to make this scene work with this amount. You know, he's only got 12 days to shoot the film. It's like, live with the flair. And I swore at that moment that if I were doing visiting him, I was all excited. I said, you know, this is great. He's empowering himself. He's not waiting for somebody to give him money, right? He's scrounging up like a ridiculously small amount of money to make a film in America. And he's just doing it. He's empowering himself. And I said, that's great, and that's what I'm going to go do. And then I visited him on the set, and I saw this going on. I said, I'm going to do it, but I will not have a DP on my set, and there will never be dulling spray on a set of mine. And then on Go, actually, we had a flare problem, and I had to start using dulling spray. But
okay. Well,
that's where it came from.
Okay, that's where it came from? Well, I had a picture of you when we were shooting the film because my background is a DP. And then as the writer-director, my first credit, my DP got busy. And I had a little picture of Doug Liman with the Aton on my Aton case. So thank you very
thank
much.
you.
Another question. I have one if you guys don't. Ah, there's one. Right there. Thank you.
I just have a question for both of you. You touched a bit about casting choices in your first and your second one. How do you approach casting in the development process, or like the idea of what a character looks like to you, or who that character is in your mind? Do you have an idea, or do you just something walks in it and you see it? That's it, or?
I think it's both. For me, it's both. Sometimes I do, since I write, have ideas characters should basically look like, although I never write with actors in mind.
And yeah, I mean, sometimes you get the person just walks through the door. And it's sort of a hit or miss. You know, I only spent 7 weeks shooting Go, but we spent 5 months casting it. So it's, but there's a really large cast in Go because it's got 3 separate storylines, but it's literally just seeing people and having them read the thing. Sometimes they're totally different than what you had in your head, and sort of it's the toughest probably. Alexander probably has the problem more because he's actually writing. Like the roles that you're totally sure you know exactly who it is, and you've got this picture in your head, not of an actor, but you just totally see the person. Those roles are the hardest to cast. versus the ones that you're still a little bit loose on and then brings it to life in the room. Those are a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think we have a question up in the back.
I got a question. How does scripts get to you guys? Is it through your agents? Do you
Well, I
get-
have a very organized system.
We've heard it.
You leave it with housekeeping, and it just follows him around.
I actually got an intern. I give him 10 scripts a week, and he reads them, and he comes back and tells me about them.
Really?
Yeah, I spoke at a screenwriting class, and I don't pay. It's great.
So it's possible that they get to them through their agents, I would think. And then, if you're lucky, his intern reads for both of them.
He's really good. I have a great intern.
Anyone else out here? Another question? Another question? There's somebody.
Did the studio departments allow any input as to how posters and trailers were put together?
What?
Yeah, no, Columbia definitely tried to keep me as involved as possible, as did Miramax. But I don't really know anything about marketing, and so I sort of, I mean, I would go to all the meetings and try to, opinion, but also really tried to hang back because, there's some things I think I know what I'm doing, and marketing, I couldn't design a poster, and but I was shocked how deferential Columbia was about getting me things and really bypassing the producers, which is a little obnoxious. But what about you?
Paramount actually seemingly was much more solicitous than Miramax was. But still, there's, I think, my experience, my slim experience with these two films is that they pay lip service to wanting your input and Paramount took a lot of input from me, but ultimately, something like General Motors or Ford or Chrysler or something that just, we've been doing it this way for all these years and it's always worked, and the stars' faces on the posters, and the trailer sort of has to tell the story of the film. And I spent a ton of time doing it. I was telling Doug earlier today that after all of that time, for the DVD release of Election, I successfully for the exclusion of the trailer from the DVD because I think it's so lousy. But I like the poster. And actually the poster was design ultimately, but the idea of Matthew Broderick's head in Reese Witherspoon's mouth had been my idea. I don't necessarily know how they realized it, but that had been one of the ideas I'd given them.
Okay, in the middle there, and then you. We've got a little cluster of questions down here. So we'll go with the fellow in the off-orange shirt, and then we'll go to the young woman.
This has sort of been referred to earlier, but do you think it helped both of you too that your second film had a larger budget than your first, but still in both cases less than $10 million, which to a big company like Paramount or the others still is very small in comparison with all the others? Do you think that helped a lot in being get done what you wanted to get done?
Well, I have to say I very much agree with what Doug was saying earlier about I'd put it a different way, which is I very much believe in working step by step, and I find very wise his instinct not to jump from a $200,000 movie to a $20 million movie, although in a way the filmmaker's problems are always the same from a Super 8 film at film school to a $1 million movie. You're there, and how are the actors going to do it?
Go
Am
was
I
no
gonna get
easier
there
than
right?
Swingers.
Yeah. But yeah, the problems are always the same. The parameters kind of, really I made Election, it was double like $8 or $9 million, double what Citizen Ruth was. But my means of production was pretty much the same. It just meant the actors were getting a little more, and it meant that I had more days of shooting, but it's not like I had that many more toys on each of those days.
What about you? Go is significantly more complex production value-wise than Swingers.
Yeah, I think it's the experiences for me were identical between the two films, especially since I shot with this. I shot it myself, the same exact camera, and I felt really strongly that, you know, in Swingers there were no producers. It was just like me and the camera, and that I wanted to sort of recreate that experience. So I put I didn't want a video assist cable tethered to the camera. The thing about the Atom, it doesn't even have a battery cable. It's all built in. So and I didn't want this cable that we might have to be removing around because it's in a shot. We put a video transmitter on the camera, and then gave all the producers and studio executives little monitors, and put their monitor, like a big monitor, like way far away, like outside somewhere. And if they brought their monitors within 30 feet of the transmitter, it was so powerful it would fry their little TVs. So it really kept this where it really was working just like Swingers.
I don't actually allow video assist on the set.
Not at all.
None. Only if I really need it to set up a complex shot, but I don't use it at all.
The producers, like producers hovering over a video village somewhere?
No, it encourages them not to be there at all.
Aha.
Can't even-
Yeah, no, you know, we've time. And
No, also, I'm sorry, also, I just don't like it. I don't want to be distracted by
No,
it.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. My video village was, you know,
Yeah.
we shoot market. The video village is outside and around the corner.
Right. Video village.
brilliant. So I want to thank Jeremy Podeswa, who had to leave early, Mr. Doug Liman, and Mr. Alexander Payne. And I hope everybody enjoys the remainder of the Trade Forum. Thanks very much.
Meals for the Trade Forum crew provided by the Old Bailiff, authentic British fare with a large outdoor patio, located in the square below the Vancouver Art Gallery.